In February of this year, we all watched the situation unfold in Ukraine, on the border with Ukraine. So as the invasion started, February 24th, as Russia started bombing Ukraine, I called up one of our guys, Sam, and I said, I need you to get to the border. I don't know. I have no idea what we can do. Like this, who knows? We have no idea. Everything is unknown right now. People were saying Russia's not even going to invade, and here it is starting to bomb Ukraine. So Sam showed up on the 25th on the Poland-Ukraine border. And to be honest, I kind of assumed that the United Nations was going to be there, the UN was going to be there. I mean, this is kind of what they do, right? And this is, what was unfolding to be the first major conflict in Europe in decades, and potentially what was going to become the largest refugee crisis in the world, and certainly in Europe. When we got to the border, there was nothing. I mean, there was nothing. There was nobody there, just tens of thousands of people streaming across out of Ukraine into Poland. Some volunteer groups were trying to do what they could. So we got on the ground and we said, okay, we need to start doing something. So we started to mobilize a team. Like, it was freezing, as you can tell, serving hot soup, pastas, all sorts of things, just doing everything that we could do. Initially, there's one pedestrian crossing, which I walked across yesterday, between Ukraine and Poland. And so we set up shop there, and we just started cooking. And people would come across. They have no idea where they were going to go from there. They were just trying to get out, and they were walking. Some people walked like 40, 60 kilometers because the lines of cars were so backed up, or people were trying to, just to get across, or they didn't have vehicles and they got dropped off at a certain point and then had to walk. So people were on journeys that took them 3 to 4 days. Some people hadn't eaten in 2 to 3 days. They hadn't eaten anything. Mostly women and children, because the men obviously were not supposed to leave because they were supposed to stay in Ukraine and fight. So it was mostly women and children coming across. So the second day that I was there, I said, I need to get across and see what we can do in Ukraine. The team started to set up an operation along the border to feed all of the border crossings. We ended up at, I think, operating at 40 border crossings, 24 hours a day, because it was just a constant stream of people. And so as that was getting established, not only in Poland, but also in Romania, Moldova, Hungary, Slovakia, I decided I needed to get across the border. And we were getting all sorts of crazy intel that the Belarusians were going to invade, and the Russians were coming, and they were like, if you go in the country, we don't know if you're going to be able to go back out of the country. Everything was this crazy fog of war. And I remember this crossing, this is in Poland, and we went, nobody was going back across into Ukraine. So we just showed up, and we had to convince the Polish border guards. And the Polish border guard told me, she's like, are you sure you want to go to Ukraine? There's very strange things happening over there. And so we convinced them that, no, we're not going all the way into Ukraine. We're going to go try to support. You can see the line of cars here. This went on for like, I don't know, dozen kilometers of just, cars like nonstop. And so we said, these people have been waiting and are waiting to cross. They're going to probably be waiting 3 to 4 days. So we're going to try to get them food and just go and start handing out food as much as we can. This was like midnight by the time we finally got across, and then we were handing out food. But we started to see and started to understand what was happening in Ukraine, and sort of step by step started to go further into the country and realized that we needed to build the biggest logistics food distribution system we had ever done, from a humanitarian scale. The United Nations was not entering Ukraine yet because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is, Russia is part of the United Nations, and they were trying to figure out how to remain neutral, but, complexities. They also were trying to negotiate, the United Nations was trying to negotiate a humanitarian corridor. So they thought that they could convince Putin to create one of the highways into Ukraine to be humanitarian only. And basically, they thought the Russian government would say, okay, then we won't bomb that highway because we know it's humanitarian only. when I heard that, I thought it was the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I mean, meanwhile, like Russian soldiers are shooting the press, they're shooting anybody, they're shooting civilians. Like, what makes you think, even if the Russian government says they're going to do that, that they're going to abide by that? So you can't expect that to happen. And it never happened. All it did was just delay the United Nations from actually activating in Ukraine. The World Food Program didn't serve its first meals. The US government gave the World Food Program $150 million immediately, sent them $150 million, gave them another $100 million. And they didn't spend any money aside from buying vehicles and procuring food that was in warehouses in Turkey and Romania. They didn't distribute anything until the end of May. So we found ourselves having to fill that gap. And I had to learn a lot of new skills, like how to move train cars all around Ukraine. We realized that we were limited on what we could do with trucks, but the railway could also get to places that drivers couldn't go as well. So I convinced I made friends with the head of the railways, convinced him to let us pay for all of our cargo. Over the last 7 months, we sent over 1,000 railway wagons, so 40,000 pallets of food all across the country by railway wagon, and just a very incredible and high sort of volume way to get to build this network and systems. This is about 5 kilometers from the Russian border north of Kharkiv. We go out in this community. This is a farming community. And I went to visit their farms as Russian planes were flying overhead. Their cows hadn't been milked in a month because it was too dangerous. Their grain silo had a big massive hole in it. Their land where they were farmed was filled with ordnance. I mean, they couldn't do anything, and they were here. They were solely reliant on whatever they could either grow in their backyards or the humanitarian support that we could bring in. So this is just a sense of all of the places that we were distributing in the country. And what's so amazing about this, because of the security aspects of it, as you saw earlier with some of my work in Mogadishu, I was the only person that really had any conflict experience. And I couldn't send any staff into a place like Ukraine knowing, unless somebody really was like, I'm going to go, I'm jumping in. I couldn't I couldn't say, okay, you're assigned to go to Ukraine. So most of the time, I was the only one that was actually in the country who was a foreigner. But what we were able to do is we were able to build this incredible network of Ukrainians, local Ukrainian teams. I think at peak, we had about 4,500 Ukrainians working with us in country. So from, delivery drivers to running the warehouses to managing procurement and, coordinating in shelters and refugee shelters. And, it was really, truly amazing. We set up warehouses in all of these locations to be able to sort of as central hubs to distribute out. And just to give you a sense, this is a video that one of my now a friend of ours who we met in Bucha, this is what she woke up to. This is this is her street where she lived. This is called Vokzalna Street. So just to get a sense of sort of what people were facing, this is what it looked like when she came out of her shelter. I mean, those were homes. You can obviously see all of the tanks littered all around, and just crazy scene. When I first met her, her house was just rubble. It was just bricks on the ground. It just looked like that. That's all that it was. Now, this is what her house looks like. So we were able to get some donations, and we got a local contractor to help rebuild. Her son, this young man named Bogdan, is like a savant chess player. He has cerebral palsy, and he's not articulate, but he is brilliant. And he races his wheelchair, where he used to before the war, and was this incredible chess player. And they barely got down to the shelter. He has burns all along his back as the Russians showed up and the fighting started on their street. And they got into the shelter, and they lived under there, miraculously survived until they were able to get out. But I think as I look at moving forward, talk a little bit about kind of what's happening now in Ukraine, and then we can have a little questions if anybody has any questions. But there's a long road ahead, and obviously it's still going on. And I think for me, one of the reasons that I think Ukraine so resonated was it was a place where I could bring a lot of my experience and what I had done in my career and work, not only with World Central Kitchen, but other things together in this moment that was really important, that is really important for the world. And I truly believe that what's happening in Ukraine right now is not just about Ukraine. It's about Europe, it's about the US, it's about the world, it's about the future of democracy. And if we do not stop it, I think we will be it will be very dangerous, I think, for the future of the planet that we're trying to build. And thankfully, the Ukrainians are doing an amazing job, and they're very grateful for the support from the United States. But there's also a lot of fear that support will end, and that Russia will be able to do what it wants in the end. So hopefully, I took this photo a week ago. This is kind of what the situation is in a lot of communities. This is in Kharkiv, which is a city in the east. And I met the governor last week, and I'd spent a lot of time here earlier this spring and summer. Even being able to stand here right now is amazing, or when I was standing there in front of this building, because it only until recently the Russians have been pushed back. So now they're far enough away that they can't shoot the artillery into the civilian areas. In this area called Saltivka, this residential neighborhood has about 350,000 people that live in it. It's the most densely populated neighborhood, because it's not its own city. It's just a neighborhood in Kharkiv in all of Europe. And every single building you walk around looks like this. There's still people living in this building on sort of the other part of the building. It's unbelievable that people are still living there right now. Mostly, thankfully, all the children are taken out. Mostly it's elderly people who don't want to leave. This is this is their home. This is all they have. People are coming back now that it's safer, and they're starting to board up the windows, or what remains, if they can get in safely. You can see some of the windows boarded up there. Until they figure out what to do. I don't think the government of Ukraine knows what it's going to do, because a lot of these buildings are just going to have to be demolished and potentially rebuilt. But this is sort of the situation now. And so I found myself telling the story of what we were seeing, and what, I in some ways kind of felt myself like this responsible position, because I was out there in these villages talking to these people and knowing that not only were we feeding people was important in the humanitarian work, and we weren't just delivering other stuff too, but also sharing the story of what the situation was. And I'll play the little snippet from this. This is one of the little short films that we put together. We tried to tell some stories of all along the way of the different places. And this is a city in the east of Ukraine, in Donetsk, which is sort of the jewel that if Putin captures, he can declare some victory. And in April, we were here at this train station when we first showed up. This is I took this on my phone, this part of the video. I think every single day about 4,000 to 8,000 people were evacuating out of this train station, mostly women and children, people in wheelchairs, seniors, a lot of children. And we arrived with the railways. They brought us here to the station, and we were trying to see how we could support. We were also bringing trains full of our food as well, so we were trying to coordinate. And the very next day, Russia dropped a missile on this train station and killed 67 people, innocent people. But in this video is this woman, Katya, who is just one of the many, many, many heroes right now in Ukraine. And it's funny. People ask me, especially when I've come back from Ukraine, people are like, wow, like, how do you process that? How do you deal with that? How do you, that must be so horrific and everything that you're seeing. And I say, yeah, that's true. It is bad. There are the bad pieces of it, but there's also the amazing stuff that you see, the amazing people that you meet, the bravery and the heroism, and like just some of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. And so that's the story that I choose to hold on to, right? Like, I acknowledge the other stuff, the bad stuff, but then what I really think about, what I go to bed thinking about, are the amazing stories. It's one of our railway wagons.
В нашей семье, но моя семья осталась в Краматорске. Мы все вовлечены в взаимопомощь. Очень нравится встречать и общаться, и помогать, и взаимодействовать. И это дает мне силы, желание и дальше работать. Чувство голода – это одно, я думаю, из самых, вот когда у тебя заканчивается, и ты понимаешь, что завтра у тебя не будет что есть. Это самое страшное, мне кажется, сейчас вот.
Оказаться в такой ситуации, и делаем сегодня все возможное, городские власти и я как мэр города, чтобы мы максимально долго могли обеспечить наших жителей в случае возможной эскалации окружения наших городов, когда будет невозможным получать продукты питания. Мы готовимся к тому, чтобы наши жители были обеспечены минимальным количеством еды, медицинских препаратов. Вот к этому мы сегодня готовимся.
I mean, it is extraordinary that you're there doing humanitarian work. You've traveled all over the country delivering meals, and this happens to those people desperately in need. Tell me what you saw.
Thank you, Christiane. It is extraordinarily shocking. We've been spending the last couple of days at this railway station working with the Ukraine Railways and meeting with the head of the station to help organize how we can provide fresh pastries, coffee, and tea, as we do at many other railway stations here across Ukraine. I then heard very quickly that 2 missiles had struck the railway station where we had just been the day before and had intended to be just an hour or so later.
Люди, которые к нам сюда приходят, они приходят в связи с тем, что у них очень сложная ситуация. Одно из главных направлений сейчас – это гуманитарная. Гуманитарная помощь продуктами питания людям. Сейчас острая необходимость именно в продуктовых пакетах, которые приходят от World Central Kitchen. Гуманитарная помощь в виде еды на сегодняшний день это очень большой вклад и это очень большое дело, потому что люди в 21 веке умирают от голода, как показал Мариуполь, как показал Харьков и Киев. Поэтому то, что делает World Central Kitchens, доставляя сюда именно потребность, которая сегодня необходима, это еда.
Ну, я точно не собираюсь никуда ехать, как и мои все заместители.
That center that Katya, where the kids were, she would bring the kids in so they would have something to do, like to just be kids, you know, like, I mean, the trauma of the children is a huge issue. So just, I know I'm ran very long, but so we, you know, the operation, the food delivery operation is just the scale of it. You know, it's hard to comprehend. We've served over 175 million meals in Ukraine. Just all across the country. It's just such a massive operation, continues to this day, a little bit less, a little bit more focused, and as the World Food Program and others have started to step up, which is great. And now really looking at the future. So share a couple of things that I'm excited about. I just came back. One of the reasons I was there, I just met with the First Lady of Ukraine yesterday. This is in Bucha. This is a piece of land in Bucha, and we are building what will be the first of hopefully many around the country, what we call they call them factory kitchens, but essentially it's a central school kitchen that's going to cook for 31 schools and kindergartens, really, you know, high quality, be able to really have high standards. And then we're also upgrading a lot of the schools, especially the older schools, have like Soviet era equipment. It's kind of insane. But to provide healthy, nutritious meals for the kids at scale and in a coordinated way. So we've got everything. It's been an amazing process working with the city and the First Lady to get it all coming together. And we're going to break ground, I think, within the next month or so, and then it will be fully operational for next school year because there's sort of a partial school year now. A lot of kids are still distance learning and people haven't come back. We're also building a train that's going to be able to go to different parts of liberated areas that are deoccupied to be able to bring food and other supplies in to those areas very quickly, because the railway is one of the most effective and safest ways to travel because they can demine it much faster than the roads and everything else. And so actually brought David Letterman was in Ukraine a couple of weeks ago. So I brought him to the railway factory where we were working on the trains because he's got a Netflix show and he is interviewing Zelensky and some other folks for the show. So I think it's going to air mid-December. If you have Netflix, it could be worth checking out. We've also found ourselves feeding animals. With Russians being pushed out of areas, we're now getting into areas that have been occupied for many, many months, in some cases since the beginning of the war. And unfortunately, the pets have been left behind in a lot of cases. Either the families have been forced to flee, they weren't able to take the pets. Even, people that left the country weren't able to get their pets out of the country. Sometimes their homes have simply been destroyed or people have been killed. And the pets really, don't have anywhere to go. So there's so many of them. I mean, it was like overwhelming. And there's amazing people. This woman, Irina, in this town called Svetahursk, which is a holy, there's the Svetahursk Lavra there that it's a very special holy place in Ukraine. As we met this woman, Irina, who was taking care of 38 cats and like dozens of dogs. And it was almost like a town cafeteria and all the animals had learned to come. And so Katya and her husband, Sergey, had been doing a lot of pet stuff as well. And so I told him, I said, well, we should, let's see what we could do. And so we started to build these little things. And then the next day we came out and there was a line of dogs waiting in line to eat food, like organized. So they were taking their turns and so, everybody was like, there's something special about Ukrainian dogs because that's not normal. But they were waiting in line to have their breakfast. And so it seems to be very successful. And this photo kind of went everywhere in Ukraine, which has been great because people have donated. So now we're starting to set up a lot more of these stations and do more pet food deliveries. It's pretty, Also, I want to mention as well, because I think this is really important. Dogs and cats have played a central role in this Ukraine conflict, which I think is so fascinating. A lot of soldiers have animals, they take care of them, especially in places where the civilians have left and they're operating. They've obviously played a central role in the psychology of just, for children and probably for the soldiers too, to have, animals there. They've taken care of them. In Kyiv right now, outside of the St. Sophia Cathedral, there's sort of an outdoor memorial installation for the defenders of the Azovstal plant in Mariupol. This is the big steel plant. They were trying to hold it. Eventually, they had to give up. Many of them were taken to prison. Some of them have been traded back. But especially the ones that have been killed, they set up this memorial. And the photos of these soldiers, these are like big dudes with guns and all these things, like half of them are like holding a little kitten or like holding a dog. And you're like, this is pretty amazing. So, it really is part of the culture there. And also I think humanizes what it is, that these are people defending their land. These are people defending their communities and their animals, just like our animals in our homes. They're part of our families as well. And it's an important thing. And so, a couple of other quick things I'll mention real quick about what else is sort of going on now in Ukraine, and then happy to answer any questions or whatever. I got to go out with a demining team last week, this past weekend. We went out, and this is going to be one of the biggest problems in Ukraine. It is going to take decades to demine, especially the agricultural lands. Every day you hear about people that get killed, and if people are going to come back into their communities, children are going to come back. Russia uses these little plastic things called butterfly mines, and they basically can they shoot out and they kind of cover a widespread area, and they look kind of like little toys, and they don't take very much pressure to go off, and they're not massive. They weren't necessarily going to kill you, but you can lose your hand, lose your arm. It's horrific. I mean, it truly is. So we went out, and the guys found unexploded ordnance, and this is their job. I mean, it's incredible what they do, but this was. So they go out, they identify where it is, they bring explosives out. The guy's like in a full suit, and he puts out the the explosive next to the ordnance, and then they blow it up. But I mean, you can imagine having to do that tens of hundreds of thousands, millions of times to clear an area. So they're starting to come up with new technologies, which is really amazing. Drones with special cameras. The Ukrainians are so inventive that obviously they're going to do what they can to solve it, but it's pretty terrible. I also went to visit. This is outside of a town called Izium. There's 450 people were buried here on the edge of the town, and many of them are not identified. And so we asked the national police what they need, and they need rapid DNA testing machines. And some of these machines were used in California during the Paradise campfire that burned down the town of Paradise. So we're going to work to get 4 machines in so they can start to identify folks. But there's going to be, unfortunately, more and more of this, I think, as areas are cleared out. They're already starting to rebuild. The infrastructure is incredible. I mean, this was a railway bridge, so we were able to get to a certain point, and it just the Russians dropped an aerial bomb next to it out of a plane, and obviously you can see just the metal being twisted. And this was from a few days ago. This was in Kherson region. So this is where the Russians today, you might have seen the news, reportedly have pulled back. The Ukrainian battalion I was with had just reclaimed this area about a week beforehand, and the Russians had blown up this bridge before they left. And apparently there was still a car there when they did it. But this is sort of, Ukraine's going to need a Marshall Plan. It's going to need a massive amount of reconstruction, massive amount of support. And, it's right now, it's sort of mind-boggling how that's going to be feasible. But I think step by step, project by project, it'll happen. This is the signs that the Ukrainians put up when they leave, when they take back an area, and it basically says, "Brothers, you are free." And they've got these billboards all over. They put them up because they probably had Russian propaganda on there previously from when the Russians were living there. So that's it. I'm just going to circle back to our roots with my grandfather, because so much of I think what I do now and what drives me, I think really a lot of it comes from him and his spirit and dedication. So. It's great to be back here and to really, really recognize that. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to.